So I'm going to go a little quickly now and just give you an example of today's demonstrations. I will be using KEYMAR with SoundCheck and Listen hardware for what I'll call R&D measurements. And then Peter talked about the 45cc for production. That is this setup here. And actually, most of my measurements will be made on that today. So I think most of you are familiar with what I'll call typical headphone measurements. Can you hear me in the back okay? Do I need to hold the microphone? So everyone's pretty familiar with frequency response, and sometimes we need to provide a correction curve, as Peter mentioned, like a diffuse field or free field correction curve. I can talk a little bit about that, but I think Peter's covered it very well. Sensitivity is important. We want to know, especially with headphones being so close to our ears, what the sound pressure level is. Distortion, which is one of my favorite topics, and I'm going to be talking about that in more detail. In particular, something I like to call non-coherent distortion. I'm not going to demonstrate impedance measurements, but certainly we can measure impedance on headphones, especially, of course, wired headphones. Wireless headphones is probably not so interesting. Channel balance. We want to look at how well the earphones are matched left to right for good stereo imaging. And then maximum sound pressure level. There's a standard BSEN 50332, I believe. And that's something that deals with maximum sound pressure level so we don't hurt our ears, and there is a standard sequence from SoundCheck to measure that. Okay. So what I'd like to do is just give you a practical demonstration of measuring the headphones I have here today in analog mode. So I have them wired up directly, and I will just put them on. I'm going to just pretend like I just put them on the what's called the 45cc, the production flat plate, and one side is a 318 coupler, and the other side is a 1/4 inch microphone and a flat plate that I'll talk about in a moment. Okay, I think I'll put my glasses on. So, first thing we want to do when measuring headphones is we want to determine what level we're going to test them at. So in SoundCheck, we have what we call these virtual instruments, and I can recall some typical setups. I'm going to have one called headphone. And what I'm doing is I'm bringing up two signal generators, one for the left and right ear, and two multimeters, which are just measuring the sound pressure level. So I can quickly determine, for example, if I put 100 millivolts into these headphones, that I'm getting about 95 dB SPL in the left ear and 96 dB SPL in the right ear. Now, if we're measuring distortion, it's actually pretty interesting in particular to know what test level we have for a particular distortion. So I'm just going to bring up the distortion analyzer, and now we can actually see the THD over time. And if we decide that, oh, I want to actually see what the distortion is going to be at what level the distortion is going to be at 200 millivolts, we can see that if we increase the level, of course, we get more distortion. So it's very important when you set up these measurements that you determine what's the appropriate voltage input into the headphones, especially for distortion measurements.
예, 그 측정을 할 때는 레벨이 굉장히 중요합니다. 왜냐 그러면 이어 시뮬레이터도 사람의 귀를 전부 다 모사를 못 시키고 94데시벨이 그 1파스칼이 마이크로폰에 들어봤을 때만 모사를 하거든요. 그래서 항상 표준에서는 94데시벨 1파스칼 기준이라고 되라고 되어 있습니다. 다른 거는 다 잴 수가 없습니다. 예, 그래서 사실 94데시벨은 굉장히 큰 소리거든요. 하지만 거기에서 밖에 이어 시뮬레이터를 우리가 만들 수밖에 없는 예, 지금 현재 과학기술 때문에 그래서 레벨을 정확하게 측정을 레프트 라이트에 대해서 동일하게 되어 있는지 아까도 이야기했지만 착용법에 따라서 이게 제대로 착용이 되는지 볼 때 맨 처음에 정하는 게 바로 톤이 우리가 원하는 레벨에서 지금 재고 있는지를 보는 게 제일 중요합니다.
Okay. So I'm going to show you a simple headphone sequence. I'm going to close these for a moment. And I'm going to open up the sequence editor that Mark mentioned briefly. So the sequence editor is actually SoundCheck's way of letting you script a particular test. And you'll notice when I run this test, the very first thing it asks me for is, do I want to recall save data? So this might be nice if I want to make a bunch of measurements and then go to my office and analyze it offline. But today I'm going to do real measurements, so I'll say no. And now it asks me for the test level. And as you saw earlier, if I want to test at 95 dBSPL, I want to use 100 millivolts. So I'll just enter that here. And you'll notice over here as I'm running this, the highlight indicates the step in the sequence. So I'll hit OK. And then it'll be sweeping both left and right ear. And it's about a 7-second sweep. And we now see the end of the measurement. And right away we say, hey, I have a problem here. What's my left ear and my right ear are very different at the low frequencies. And as Peter mentioned, it's really important that we want to get a good seal for repeatable measurements. So I can go and say, all right, let's bring up the virtual instruments again.
지금 레프트 라이트가 차이가 많이 생기죠. 그러면 다시 이제 그 LR이 서로 이렇게 착용이 제대로 되는지 확인하기 위해서 아까 첫 번째 그 이야기한 것처럼 이제 시그널을 넣어서 확인하는 절차를 거쳐야 됩니다. 레벨을 정하고 나면 제대로 피팅이 제대로 됐는지를 확인해야 되겠죠. 오케이.
So we can see that the right earphone is not as well sealed as the left. So as Peter mentioned, my favorite tool is to use the pink noise with the real-time analyzers in SoundCheck. So if I go up here and choose headphone seal, I now have pink noise at 100 millivolts out of both left and right. And we can see that the right real-time analyzer down here, that the low frequencies are rolling off quite rapidly.
오른쪽 저주파수 특성이 지금 좀 이상하게 나오죠.
So I'm going to adjust just the right. I had a little bit of a leak in the ear coupler. Now that I've adjusted it, we can see that both left and right ear are nicely sealed, especially at the low frequencies.
특히 그 저주파수 낮은 쪽을 보면 실링이 제대로 되어 있는지 안 되어 있는지 바로 확인할 수가 있습니다.
So great. Now I can repeat the measurement. And we should get better results at the low frequencies. And voila. So now we can see the frequency response, and if we want to, we can even see the phase. We also see the left-right balance, which we can see is extremely good. It's within a couple dB up to almost 10 kilohertz. On the bottom graph, we can see the total harmonic distortion, and of course, we see something going on in this frequency range here, around 3 kilohertz. And then we can see the overall sensitivity is now weighted. And this is important when we're measuring headphones. We really want to look at the sensitivity over a frequency range, because if we choose 1 kilohertz, it may actually be at a dip or a peak, which is not really representative of what we're hearing.
그러니까 나중에 기준 레벨을 정할 때 1kHz로 하면 안 된다는 거예요. 아까 이어 시뮬레이터에서 1kHz에서 범프가 생기기 시작하죠. 그래서 1kHz, 스피커를 열 때는 1kHz가 맞아요. 1kHz는 이유는 뭐 웨이팅을 넣나 안 넣나 똑같은 게 A 웨이팅이든 웨이팅을 빼든 간에 1kHz나 동일하죠. 그래서 보통 스피커를 열 때는 1kHz 많이 쓰는데 이어폰을 열 때는 1kHz 하면 안 된다는 거예요. 거기서 굉장히 큰 변화가 생기는 구형이기 때문에
Okay.
그래서 일반적으로 표준에서는 500Hz를 쓰라고 돼 있어요.
So, next thing I'd like to talk about is high-res audio. Maybe I'll pull this out here. So, just to show you how old I am, in 1986, I was working for Apogee Acoustics, who made these very expensive ribbon loudspeakers. They went out to about 26 kilohertz. And I was trying to do a live comparison where I recorded my classical guitar instructor and his friend, and then immediately played back on the loudspeakers so we can compare, recorded sound or live sound to recorded playback. Around that time, digital audio had really just taken off, especially in the consumer market. The Sony PCM recorder had come out, which allowed us what back then was considered high-res, 44.1 kilohertz at 16 bits. And this really was a big deal back then, but right away there was a lot of discussion about whether digital audio sounded as good as analog, especially compared to LPs back then. And I'll get into that in a little more detail, but when we were doing these tests, I was trying to decide what microphones to use for the recording, and because I used measurement microphones at work to measure these speakers, I actually chose the 3 different microphones. There was the B&K 4133, which went out to 40 kilohertz, but had kind of a high noise floor. So even though it was extremely flat, you could hear a little bit of noise in the recording. And I knew that the PCM recorder cut out abruptly at 20 kilohertz. It had what we'd call a brick wall filter. So I went with another microphone with a higher sensitivity called a 4165 that went up to 20 kilohertz. And then just for curiosity, B&K also had a studio microphone, which was somewhere in between. It kind of went out to almost 30 kilohertz, had a lower noise floor than the 4133, but it still had somewhere in between the frequency range and sensitivity of the 2 measurement microphones. Okay. Oh, sorry. So the big news was, when we did blind listening test to all 3 microphones, a very interesting thing happened. All of us could say definitively that the microphone that went out to 40 kilohertz sounded better than the other 2 microphones. And I thought this was very strange because if the recording could only go up to 20 kilohertz, what information was there above 40 kilohertz? It just didn't make any sense to me. But generally speaking, we all agreed that the microphone with the wider frequency range sounded better than the microphones with the narrower frequency range. And at that time, I really could not explain it. It was not what I expected. I actually thought that the microphone that went out to 20 kilohertz with the higher sensitivity would be better. It would be a better, quote, analog filter. So I'll explain why I think that is in a moment, but first let's review what we mean by high-resolution audio.
Okay, moment.
Okay.
하도 많이 이거 강의 시간에 많이 했던 거라서 좀 그래도 처음 듣는 분이 계시니까 설명을 해드릴게요. 마이크로폰이 20kg까지 녹음되는 마이크도 있고 30kg까지 녹음되는 마이크로폰이 있고 40kg까지 녹음되는 마이크로폰이 있어요. 그 3가지가 있는데 모델을 다 뺄게요. 그렇게 해가지고 녹음을 했는데 3 녹음 다 그냥 그 디지털 필터로 가지고 20kg 이상은 다 날려버린 거예요. 어쨌든 CD급을 해야 되기 위해서. 그러면 어쨌든 20kg 이상 정보는 다 날아가 버린 거잖아요. 그렇죠? 그런데도 그걸 들어보면 음질이 40kg까지 밴드위스가 된 녹음이 더 좋았던 거예요. 그 당시는 자기는 몰랐대, 그 이유를. 결론이 뭐냐고 하면 바로 20km까지 녹음되는 놈, 30km까지 녹음되는 놈, 40km 녹음되는 놈의 마이크로폰의 바로 페이지 특성이 다르다는 거예요. 페이지 특성이 아주 엉망으로 20km까지 나오는 것도 엉망으로 되고 30, 40으로 올라갈수록 페이지 특성이 더 안정적으로 간다는 거죠. 그래서 페이지 특성이 굉장히 중요한 거구나. 음향 재생기에서 그 이야기를 지금 하려고 합니다.
So, the Digital Entertainment Group and the Consumer Electronics Association, along with the Recording Academy, have come up with they call it a formal definition, I would say it's informal, of what high-res means. Essentially, high resolution means greater than CD quality. So that's greater than 44.1 kilohertz sampling rate and greater than 16 bits dynamic range. The most popular audiophile formats out there that support this high res is FLAC, Free Lossless Audio Codec, and ALAC, Apple Lossless Audio Codec. The problem is there is no universal standard for high-res audio. There is no specification that says plus or minus so many dB out to 40 kilohertz, or even what the dynamic range signal-to-noise ratio has to be. So it's a very loose standard. And I think that's a little bit of a disservice, and I think they really need to come up with a better definition.
Next.
Okay. So one thing I want to just warn you is that I discovered the hard way that just because you get a FLAC file doesn't mean it's exactly the same recording as the original. When I did the original listening test, I had a pair of Stax headphones that go up to 40 kilohertz. And I had a Steely Dan Gaucho recording, that the original one, which was on a CD, 44.1 kilohertz and 16 bits. And I compared it to a FLAC file that apparently when they recorded that album, they actually did it at 96 kilohertz sampling rate, 24 bits. And I did an A-B comparison. I had different people in the office listen. And we all agreed it sounded different. In fact, the FLAC file we all thought sounded better. And I was like, but they don't sound, there's something strange going on here. It's not just high frequencies. I just feel like maybe the mix is different. And lo and behold, when we analyzed the two recordings that were supposedly identical, someone had changed the mix of the recording. If you looked at the statistics of the CD compared to the FLAC file, they were not identical. So just to be certain, we took the FLAC recording and we downsampled it to CD quality. And then we could not hear any difference. So that FLAC file at 96 kilohertz, 24 bits, downsampled to 44.1 kilohertz at 16 bits, A-B comparison, we could not hear the difference.
네, 자기가 정전형 헤드폰이 스탁 헤드폰 가지고 플렉 파일하고 CD하고 이렇게 이제 비교를 해봤는데 좀 다르다는 걸 느끼게 됐고요. 그 다른 이유가 파일 포맷이 바뀔 때 마스터링 되는 것들이 좀 웨이폼들이 좀 바뀌는 걸 알 수 있었고, 그다음 재미있는 거는 플래그로 돼 있는 걸 CD로 바꾸면 그렇게 차이가 크지는 않는데 CD를 플래그로 바꾸면 차이가 되게 확연히 느낄 수 있더라. 뭐 이런 얘기인 것 같습니다. 저는 안 들어봐서 모르겠어요. 그렇다고 하니까. 그럼 오케이.
All right, thanks. So, probably easier if I hold this. So let's just review a little bit about high resolution in terms of, first of all, bit depth. So we know roughly for 1 bit you can get 6 dB of dynamic range. And we know if we have a 16-bit CD audio that in theory we should be able to get greater than 96 dB of dynamic range. And that would compare to 24 bits where we could get, for example, 144 dB. The interesting thing is, if we're doing a recording of live music, we know, first of all, the human threshold of pain, 120 dB SPL is very loud. And I'm sure people have gone to concerts where it's been 120 dB, and maybe you've hurt your ears. But at the end of the day, even if we said 120 dB was as loud as we could tolerate, humans can tolerate, and we subtract 96 dB from 120, we're approaching around 30 dB sound pressure level. And if we take a typical recording environment, it could be a very quiet concert hall, it's going to be at least 40 to 50 dB background noise. So it's a little funny to say that we need more than 16-bit on playback, because clearly 96 dB, if done properly, will cover more than the typical usable range, not of just human hearing, but also most music at best has 30 dB a dynamic range. Popular music, sometimes 20 dB a dynamic range. So I started to wonder, why would you want 24 bits? And the only good explanation that I can think of is, as a recording engineer, when you are working with recordings, you're mixing, you're processing. Every time you process that signal, you're adding more noise. So if I have more dynamic range to begin with, and every time I process it, I lose some, I'm still maintaining that wide enough dynamic range so that if I play it back, for example, on a CD, I will still have a very good signal-to-noise ratio. So there, I think it makes total sense to do the recording in 24 bits. Call it headroom if you want, but I think it makes sense to always have more headroom than you ultimately need. Okay. So let's talk about sampling rate for a moment. So we know that if we are going to do the Nyquist theory, we have to sample at least twice the frequency range of interest. And we also have to take into account that some bandwidth is lost due to low-pass filtering, anti-alias filters. So just as an example, if we want 20 kilohertz bandwidth, typically we want to sample at least a 44.1, 48 kilohertz sampling rate. And if we wanted 80 kilohertz bandwidth, we want at least 192 kilohertz sampling rate. Very straightforward. So listen is in, obviously, the test and measurement business. We want to be able to measure all frequency ranges, all dynamic ranges. And we do have some hardware that will sample at 192 kilohertz, 24 bits, and 1 microvolt of input noise. So clearly we can measure a wide dynamic range, a wide frequency range. In fact, the software doesn't care what the sampling rate is. We could even use different hardware, and we've tried some of the professional sound cards that even go up to 384 kilohertz to do measurements. You just need more memory, but it's all possible. So at the end of the day, we can measure whatever frequency range, whatever bit depth, even whatever number of channels you want. It really depends on the hardware. It's not a software limitation. So, more importantly, let's talk about what we can hear, and also what can music actually reproduce. Now, I think most of you, at least me, I'm mostly interested in acoustic instruments. It's not to say that I don't love synthesizers or electric guitars, but the reality is most music is actually recorded with microphones that roll off above 20 kilohertz. That's just a fact. Just recently I noticed Sony and some other people are introducing recording microphones that go beyond 20 kilohertz. But let's face it, if there's a microphone involved in music, it's not only is the microphone rolling off, but the musical instruments will have some harmonics that may go out to 16 kilohertz or slightly above. In fact, female voice, interestingly enough, is one of the few things that goes out to almost 20 kilohertz. But the vast majority of at least acoustic instruments do not go beyond 20 kilohertz. There is no real energy above 20 kilohertz that you can measure.
그 대부분의 악기들이 20kg 이상이 넘어가면 에너지가 거의 이제 크게 줄어들기 때문에 그 대부분 이제 녹음을 20kg 이상 안 하는 거고요. 사람도 이제 그 이상 들을 수도 없고 뭐 그런 이야기를 하고 있는 겁니다. 그래서 하이레즈를 왜 하는지 모르겠다. 이제 이런 얘기죠. 네, 그 측정하는 엔지니어 입장에서는. 오케이.
Most humans cannot hear above 20 kilohertz. And this is really just a statistical fact that especially by the age of 40, which I am, a little older than that, much older, it is a well-known fact that your hearing loss really starts to take effect even as early as age 20. And it'd be very surprising, I know I cannot hear above 15 kilohertz, but most people really cannot hear that great above 15 kilohertz. And it's, even if you look at the animal kingdom out there, unless you are a porpoise, you cannot hear up to 100 kilohertz. A dolphin, in fact, even a chinchilla can only hear out to 20 kilohertz or so. But in any case, there are a few exceptions, but most people cannot hear above 20 kilohertz. It's just a statistical fact. So, why is that? Well, if we look at the physiology of the human ear, Peter already showed us some of this. We have what we call the middle ear. So after the ear canal, we have the tympanic membrane, the eardrum, and we have this wonderful mechanical amplification device and impedance matching device. It takes airwaves and amplifies it roughly 3-to-1 through the ossicles, these three bones, the tiniest bones in the human body, and then it vibrates what's called the oval window, where the cochlea, which is full of fluid, then has essentially waves going through fluid inside the cochlea. And this device, this whole auditory ossicles, are actually the reason why we can't hear above 20 kilohertz.
사람이 20kHz 이상을 못 듣는 제일 근본적인 이유가 이 고막으로 들어오는 공기 진동으로 들어오는 걸 갖다가 기계적인 움직임으로 여기다가 이제 달팽이가 전달해 줘야 되는데 이거 자체가 20km 이상에서 움직일 수가 없다라는 거죠. 그래서 20km 이상을 만약에 듣는 사람이 있다고 하면 요게 고장이 났거나 뭐 이렇게 좀 뭐 그런 사람인 거죠. 이게 이제 왜냐 그러면 이 공기에서 여기서 이렇게 기계적으로 하려면 굉장히 이제 많은 증폭이 돼야 되게 이 증폭을 하기 위해서 지금 이런 그 이소골이라는 세 개의 작은 뼈가 있거든요. 이게 굉장히 20에서 50배 정도 증폭을 해가지고 나가는데 지금 이거 자체를 운동시키기 위해서는 굉장히 그 고주파수로 올라갈수록 얘를 운동시킬 수 있는 능력이 확연하게 떨어지기 때문에 거의 설령 악기에서 소리가 나온다고 하지만 사람은 20km 이상 듣는 것들이 결국 간단치만 않다라는 거예요.
I think we should get a translation back when you tell a joke. I don't know what people are laughing about. Okay. So if we now look at this we take the ossicles, the three bones I mentioned, the tympanic membrane, oval window, and now we unwrap the cochlea, the thing that looks like a snail. Again, we're talking about something that is, if you roll it out, is only 30 millimeters long, not very long. We can actually see that we have hair cells going up and down the cochlea, and they act as basically frequency analyzers. So at high frequencies, the hair cells closest to the oval window detect high frequencies. This is why as we get older, those tend to get damaged and disappear. And the low frequencies are actually towards the end of the cochlear membrane. So if we look at the human ear's sensitivity to sound, we notice that our ear is most sensitive in the 2 to 5 kilohertz region, and I purposely flipped this around to represent the entrance of the ear at the high frequencies. And you notice that the ear sensitivity actually at 20 kilohertz is drastically reduced. We're talking about on the order of 40 to 60 dB less sensitive than, say, 3 kilohertz.
지금 이게 고주파수는 이쪽에서 느끼게 되고요. 이 밑에 이제 나중에 그 유모 세포라고 한 2만 개 정도 되는 세포들이 여기서 전기가 발생되면 저주파가 들어오는구나, 여기는 중주파가 들어오는구나, 여기서 만약에 스파크가 발생되면 내 쪽으로 전달해줘가지고 고주파수 들어오는 거 이렇게 알게 돼 있고요. 이쪽이 그래서 20Hz부터 20kHz까지 이렇게 돼 있는데 보면 알지만 이게 이제 뭐냐 그러면 이렇게 큰 소리, 이만큼 소리가 들어와야 겨우 듣는다는 얘기거든요. 여기는 요만큼만 들어오도 듣는다는 게 굉장히 감도가 뛰어나다는 거죠. 그래서 20km 밑으로는 못 듣는다는 얘기예요. 설령 에너지가 있더라도 이 감도 자체가 확 떨어져 버리기 때문에 얘 자체 움직임이 없기 때문에 예, 그래서 20km 이상 듣기가 굉장히 어렵다라는 이야기가 바로 미케니컬한 이유 때문입니다.
Yeah, the loss of sensitivity at high frequencies is just due to the impedance of these three bones, because basically they just can't react fast enough. The mass is too much, so you get an impedance, a higher impedance at high frequencies.
뼈 세 개로 움직이려면 질량을 갖고 있는 뼈를 개인적인 빠른 움직임에 큰 에너지가 나올 수 없기 때문에 뼈 자체 움직임을 만들어줄 수도 없고 뼈가 못 움직이기 때문에 코클리어 쪽으로 에너지가 전달이 안 되죠. 그래서 이렇게 감도가 이렇게 막 이게 손다란 말 그만큼 들을 수 없다라는 얘기예요. 아무리 큰 소리가 들어오더라도 요 밑으로 들어가 버리기 때문에 못 듣는다는 얘기예요.
At low frequencies, you lose sensitivity because your own ear essentially has a noise floor due to blood flow. So if you ever go into an anechoic chamber that's really quiet, it seems very strange, like you can hear your heart beating. In reality, you're just hearing the blood flowing through your ear, and that creates a noise floor. So at low frequencies, you're basically limited by noise due to blood flow through your ear.
그 저주파수에서 감도가 이렇게 이게 감도가 높고 낮은 겁니다. 이렇게 된 것들은 이게 만약에 감도가 이렇게 있다 그러면 종일 시끄러워서 살 수가 없어요. 자기 피도로 가는 소리를 지가 다 들어야 되기 때문에 밤에 잠도 못 자고 그래서 이게 감도를 이렇게 떨어뜨려 놓은 거라.
Yeah, I always wonder if you could stop your heart, whether you could hear low noises better. But I don't want to try that. Okay, the last thing I want to say about the human hearing is that there are filters. We tend to call these masking filters, but essentially the human ear, because of the grouping of the hair cells, has some frequency resolution. Some people like to oversimplify it and call it roughly a 1/3 octave filter, but the reality is they change with frequency and level. And you notice at the higher frequencies, the filters in the human ear actually get pretty wide. And this is why I recommend not too much resolution, frequency resolution, when you're measuring at high frequencies, because the ear is just going to sum up the power anyways. So the big question is, why measure above 20 kilohertz? And like a lot of things in audio, there's a disconnect between what we do and how we explain it. Maybe there is a reason why we need to go above 20 kilohertz.
듣지도 못하는 걸 왜 측정합니까? 이렇게 물어보는데 다 이유가 있다라는 거죠. 예. 측정한 네, 좀 이따 그에 대해 설명을 하도록 하겠습니다.
So the explanation that I find the most probable is if we want to have flat frequency response out to 20 kilohertz, if we can hear out to 20 kilohertz, we actually, now this is important, phase, that by definition at resonance, so if we have a resonance at 40 kilohertz, or I'm sorry, if we have a resonance at 20 kilohertz, we have a 90-degree phase shift. That's just by definition. So that means that just if we make a perfectly flat loudspeaker out to 20 kilohertz, more than likely the phase will not be flat out to 20 kilohertz, unless we equalize it or some digital signal processing.
내가 20kg까지 위상 왜곡이 없는 상태로 하려면 적어도 40kg까지는 측정을 해야 된다는 거죠. 예. 그래서 2배 이상의 사람이 듣는 것보다 2배 이상의 대역을 갖고 있는 마이크로폰으로 녹음을 해야 20kg까지도 정확한 녹음이 된다는 거예요. 그래 놓고 나중에 20kg 이상을 잘라버리더라도 이제 크기하고 위상이 왜곡이 없는 녹음이 된다는 거예요.
So it's always good, again, to have more headroom. So if we want flat phase response out to 20 kilohertz, we probably need flat magnitude out to 40 kilohertz in a transducer. The problem is that this also introduces another issue. If we play back two signals, two tones at 30 and 33 kilohertz in a typical transducer, it will also produce intermodulation products, which can beat down into the audio range. So in the graph below, I have a red 30 kilohertz and a 33 kilohertz signal, and we can see now we're getting intermodulation products. For example, the difference being 3 kilohertz is going to fall right in the most sensitive region of human hearing and should be quite audible.
이게 이제 이 밑에 훨씬 더 중요한 얘기인데요. 30하고 30, 우리가 이제 기본적으로 듣는 이어폰, 헤드폰을 주니까 그게 많이 이야기를 할게요. 고주파수 특성을 플랫하게 낸다라는 것들은 상당히 굉장히 어렵습니다. 이어폰, 헤드폰에서는 거의 불가능한 거고요. 분할 진동이 많이 생기기 때문에 굉장히 출렁출렁하고 피크도 많고 딥도 많은 형태로 갈 수밖에 없어요. 그렇게 돼서 굉장히 어쨌든 나오기는 하지만 굉장히 사실은 많이 더럽게 많이 나온다는 거고요. 근데 30하고 33kHz를 굉장히 좋은 이어폰에 넣어보면 30하고 33 두 개만 나와야 되겠죠. 근데 사람은 못 듣죠. 30kg도 못 듣고 33kg 못 듣습니다. 근데 문제는 그 재생 특성이 굉장히 더럽기 때문에 그거 관련된 바로 혼변조 왜곡이 들어오는 겁니다. 그러면 저게 차가 어떻게 됩니까? 3kg, 그 다음에 6kg, 9kg, 12kg, 15kg 이런 것들이 들어오겠죠. 18kg 이런 게 들어오겠죠. 그게 사람이 듣는다는 거예요. 그래서 오히려 괜히 신호음을 괜히 하이레즈라고 그래가지고 괜히 넓게 내주면 오히려 저 쓰레기 같은 소리가 실제로 들리는 거 이제 더 나쁜 소리가 들릴 수도 있다는 겁니다. 그래서 내가 하이레즈 컨텐츠를 들으려면 굉장히 시그널 체인이 굉장히 좋은 것들로 듣지 않으면 오히려 더 나쁜 소리가 들린다는 거예요. 그냥 CD로 들었으면 없었을 걸. 예.
Okay. So, as Peter mentioned this morning, that conventional 711 ear simulators, or now 318, are really only well defined up to 8, maybe 10 kilohertz. And even with some of the other newer ear simulators that go up to 20 kilohertz, there's very few that are well defined above 20 kilohertz. Although now Peter's showing some information there, so we'll have to reevaluate that. So ultimately, we can't use a 1/2-inch microphone. We need to use something like a 1/4 inch or an 1/8 inch microphone that extend well beyond 20 kilohertz. Now, for my experiments, I'm going to actually use a 1/4 inch microphone and a flat plate coupler. And I think you saw it earlier. It basically is just a 1/4 inch microphone flush mounted to this plate of aluminum. And the problem is, if you're not careful, if you don't use the right type of headphone, it's kind of a meaningless measurement. But if I'm going to measure a circumaural over-the-ear headphone that's low impedance, and that's the key, low impedance, like typically open-backed headphones are low impedance, they actually will not be affected by, you will not have the impedance issue that you would have with a typical earbud and a coupler. So I can just do away with the coupler and just measure the headphone directly. But the key thing is circumaural, low impedance.
지금 우리가 기존 커플러 같은 경우는 어쨌든 10kg까지 못 쟀기 때문에 2분의 1인치로 지금 현재 7일 커플러는 다 2분의 1인치 마이크로폰이 들어가 있어요. 보통 20kg까지 못 재거든요. 20kg. 그걸로 가지고는 20kg까지는 못 잰다는 얘기예요. 내가 20kHz까지 재려면 2분의 1인치 마이크로폰을 잴 게 아니고 4분의 1인치 마이크로폰이나 8분의 1인치 마이크로폰을 써서 40kHz까지 평탄하게 나오는 걸 써야 20kHz까지 위상 왜곡이 없는 녹음이 가능하다는, 측정이 가능하다는 거죠. 그 이야기를 하고 있고요. 그래서 4분의 1인치나 8분의 1인치로 쓰는 게 훨씬 더 낫다. 예, 맨 마지막 부분은 좀 얘기가 많아서, 예, 좀 이따가 나중에 이제 더 이야기를 하도록 하겠습니다.
Okay. So if I use a 1/4-inch microphone, depending on the microphone, as Peter mentioned, it easily could go up to 70 kilohertz. I'll just skip this real quickly. But even a 1/4-inch microphone, and this is straight out of the B&K measurement microphone handbook, does not have a flat phase response well out to even 20 kilohertz. We can see that this particular microphone is about 15 degrees down at 10 kilohertz. And again, this is directly related to the resonance of the microphone. The 1/2-inch microphone is 30 degrees down at 10 kilohertz. And not that anyone really uses a 1-inch microphone, but you can see right away that the resonant frequency of the 1-inch microphone must be around 20 kilohertz because it's 90 degrees down at 10 kilohertz.
그림에도 보시면 아시겠지만 마이크로폰들이 이게 1인치, 2분의 1인치, 4분의 1인치 마이크로폰이 있는데 1kHz 이상에서부터 위상이 왜곡됨을 알 수가 있습니다.
Yeah. We actually did a very interesting listening test where we created all-pass filters. So an all-pass filter is flat magnitude, but we could adjust the phase. And we literally took these all-pass filters and introduced it between the music and the Stax headphones. And all of us could easily hear the difference in phase between the 1-inch and the 1/2-inch microphone. Me personally, I had a hard time with the 1/4-inch difference, but even some of the people with better hearing than me could actually hear the phase difference above 10 kilohertz.
그러면 저렇게 페이즈 차이가 나는 걸 사람 진짜 잘 들을 수 있을까요? 거기에 대해서 의문이 생기죠. 그러면 지금까지 우리 녹음한 건 다 쓰레기인가요? 뭐 그냥 이렇게 생각할 수도 있지 않습니까? 그래서 이제 거기에 대한 이유를 좀 있으면 설명을 할 겁니다. 그러니까 사람이 근데 위상에 대한 왜곡은 매그니튜드보다는 훨씬 덜 느낀다는 거죠. 좀 둔하기 때문에 나은데 어떤 특정한 음악에 대해서는 또 더 잘 느낄 수도 있어요. 음악에 따라서 다릅니다. 특히 보컬 소리 같은 경우에 우리가 계속 친숙해져 있는 보컬 소리 같은 경우에는 이게 훨씬 더 확연히 더 잘 들리고요. 위상이 왜곡이 되면. 그리고 잔향을 적게 넣으면 적게 넣을수록 더 잘 들립니다. 잔향을 막 엄청 넣었다 그러면 절대 못 느끼겠죠. 위상 왜곡이 이미 소스에서 이미 돼버렸기 때문에. 근데 이제 그렇게 안 하면 좀 더 드라이한 사운드일수록 더 위상 왜곡을 더 잘 느낄 수 있고, 그리고 스피커보다는 헤드폰, 이어폰이 훨씬 더 위상 왜곡을 더 잘 느낍니다. 왜냐하면 우리가 룸에서 들을 때는 룸에서 반사되는 게 있기 때문에 또 위상이 왜곡이 돼버리거든요. 근데 우리가 직접 바로 고막을 바로 때리기 때문에 위상 왜곡을 훨씬 더 잘 느낍니다. 그래서 이어폰, 헤드폰의 위상 왜곡이 굉장히 중요하다는 거예요.
So I started doing a literature research about whether phase was different. And when I talk about phase, I'm talking about phase linearity. I'm not talking about phase between left and right. I'm not talking about absolute phase like polarity, plus or minus. I'm talking about phase linearity versus frequency. The first person that I found was David Griesinger, who's kind of a famous acoustician at Lexicon Harmon. I think he's actually a consultant now. And he said the phase relationships of harmonics from a complex tone contain more information about the sound source than the fundamentals. And he had this graph to explain it. But the more I thought about it, the more it started to make sense. Music is full of harmonics. If the harmonics are not reproduced by phase linear system, we will see they will affect the crest factor of the signal. If the second harmonic is at a different phase than the third harmonic, and so on and so forth, we are definitely changing the time waveform.
지금 그 두 톤을 가지고 보여준 건데요. 이거 주파수 분석을 하면 두 개가 똑같습니다. 근데 중요한 건 뭐냐면 웨이브폼이 완전히 다르죠. 왜냐? 페이즈가 한쪽은 틀어져 있기 때문에. 우리가 보면 타임 도면에서 보면 당연히 다르다라고 했는데 맨날 이거 그 주파수 뭐 500Hz 에너지, 뭐 1000kHz 에너지, 10kHz 에너지 이것만 매그니튜드만 본다고 하면 실제로 정확한 어떤 그 음질을 갖다가 우리는 볼 수가 없죠. 그래서 페이즈는 바로 시간 도면을 까지도 같이 보자라는 의미라고 보시면 됩니다.
So more research, I found this guy, John Bowley, who's a R&D scientist at GN Resound, who actually has done some AES presentations on the audibility of phase. And he cited this paper by Stanley Lipschitz, John Van der Kroy, and Mark Popcock. And they found on the audibility of mid-range phase distortion that even quite small mid-range phase non-linearities can be audible on suitably chosen signals. They also said that audibility is far greater on headphones than loudspeakers, which kind of makes sense because when we're listening to headphones, we're not introducing a bunch of room reflections. It's directly coupled to the ear. And in general, we have a better signal-to-noise ratio as well. So that makes sense. And they said that this was very easy to reproduce in an anechoic chamber on headphones. They said, though, in some situations with what he called normal music or speech, like with a lot of room reflections, reverberation, it was not very audible. But even in those conditions, that some recorded vocal material, again, that very sensitive part of human hearing from 1 to 5 kilohertz, that they found with 99% confidence they could identify any phase nonlinearities.
그래서 아까도 이야기 드린 건데요. 그 미드레인지에서 특히 이제 보컬 같은 거 있잖아요. 미드레인지에서 페이즈가 왜곡이 돼버리면 사람은 굉장히 잘 느끼고요. 스피커보다는 이어폰, 헤드폰에서 훨씬 더 잘 느낀다는 거죠. 왜? 이게 사실 그 사람들이 이제 페이즈 왜곡에 대해서 별로 신경 안 쓰는 사람이 어떤 사람이냐 그러면 페이즈 왜곡이 되면 어떻게 들리냐고 하면 공간감이 더 있다고 하고 뭐 이런 식으로 이야기를 해요. 실제로 어쨌든 우리가 공간에서 듣는 것들은 직접만의 반사음들이 막 이렇게 섞이기 때문에 페이즈 왜곡이 돼버리는 거거든요. 원래 원음을 듣는 게 아니고 더 거기다 조미료가 치진 소리가 들리는데 그걸 가지고 사람들은 공간감을 이야기한다는 거죠. 그래서 멀티플 BA 드라이브 막 해가지고 페이지 왜곡이 엄청나게 됐는데도 공간감을 이야기하니까 뭐 좋다 나쁘다 이렇게 이야기를 할 수 있는 거예요. 근데 실제로는 그런 페이지가 왜곡이 된 거죠. 원음이 아닌 겁니다. 그래서 이제 이런 얘기들이 많이 오가는 거죠. 페이지 왜곡에 대해서 좋다 나쁘다에 대해서 무조건 멀티웨이브 드라이브를 쓰면 무조건 페이지 왜곡이 되게 돼 있어요. 2 드라이브부터 시작해가지고 뭐 BA 드라이브 10개, 20개, 막 100개까지 달리는 이런 것들이 있는데 와 공간감이 죽이네. 그거는 페이지 왜곡이 된 겁니다.
Okay, so just to kind of simulate this, we can create a what we'll call a brick wall filter, a very steep filter at 4 kilohertz. And because it's a brick wall filter, of course, it's going to have a huge impact on the phase response. The early CD players or playback at 44.1 kilohertz, they had a brick wall analog filter. And a lot of people complained that the transient response of digital playback was flawed by these filters. Nowadays, it's not an issue because we have 10 or 100 times oversampling, and we can actually move the filter way out beyond audibility and have not just flat magnitude, but flat phase out to 20 kilohertz, even though we're ultimately working with a recorded 44.1 kilohertz sampling rate.
지금 그 브리콜 비트라디가 이렇게 급격하게 확 자르지 않습니까? 이렇게 매그니튜드가 급격하게 잘리면 반드시 페이즈 왜곡이 굉장히 크게 들어옵니다. 그래서 저렇게 해서 들으면 나중에는 굉장히 문제가 생기는데 그에 대한 예를 이 다음에 보여드릴 겁니다.
So this brick wall filter introduces this huge phase nonlinearity. And if we play a 4 kilohertz tone simultaneously with a 500 hertz tone, we can see the 500 hertz tone going up and down on top of the 4 kilohertz. And we put it through this brick wall filter. Look what happens to the resulting waveform. Not only does it look different, but the crest factor, the peak to RMS ratio, has changed dramatically. And it's not unreasonable to think that you can hear that difference.
지금 4kHz에서 확 자르는 걸 했거든요. 4kHz 넘어가면 쑥 떨어지는 걸 굉장히 급하게 판다고 해서 브릭볼 필터라고 그러는데요. 그걸 쓴 건데 이 위와 아래 거는 FFT 분석을 하면 똑같습니다. 주파수 분석을 해보면 매그니튜드가 두 주파수가 같지만 모양이 완전히 다르죠. 그게 바로 페이즈가 바로 틀어졌기 때문에 그렇습니다. 하지만 사람들은 과연 위하고 아래를 못 느낄까요? 느낄 수 있다라는 겁니다.
Okay. So I have a pair of Stax headphones, electrostatic, open ear, and I've measured them. The manufacturer claims they go up to 40 kilohertz. And if I did a comparison, I actually could see they do go up to 40 kilohertz. And if you look at the red curve, that is on the flat plate coupler with a 1/4-inch microphone. If you look at the blue curve, that's on a hats with a correction curve. And you can see at low frequencies they match quite well. Actually, I got a better seal with the flat plate coupler than the pinna, which is not too surprising. But without a doubt, the old style 711 coupler has some issues above 20 kilohertz, peaks, dips, and rolls off. So I would argue that unless you're using maybe the new high-res couplers, that it's pointless to really read too much into the data above 10 kilohertz with a traditional 711 coupler.
그러니까 10kHz 이상을 만약에 내가 정확하게 재고 싶다고 하면요. 지금 4분의 1인치 마이크로폰을 일단 써야 되고요. 그리고 그 4분의 1 마이크로폰 위치가 지금 저 안쪽에 2.5cm 들어가 있는 지금 이런 이어 시뮬레이터가 아니고 바로 여기 그 판때기까지 딱 나와 가지고 있잖아요. 마이크가 바로 이게 요 바깥에까지 나와 있는 저걸로 써야 40kHz 이상이 좀 깨끗하게 보인다는, 정확하게 보인다는 겁니다. 이 안쪽에 들어가 가지고 있으면 굉장히 이제 나중에 착용할 때 편차도 심하고, 근데 내가 좀 더 정확한 특성을 원한다고 한다고 하면, 재현성이 있고 특성을 원한다고 하면 이 빨간 것처럼 나오는 거죠. 저런 지금 여기 전시되어 있는 건데요. 이게 알루미늄으로 되어 있는 원통에 4분의 1인치 마이크로폰이 끝까지 나와 있는 겁니다. 딱 마이크로폰의 끝에 위치가 이 알루미늄하고 같이 딱 맞게 일직선이 되게끔 안으로 쑥 들어가 있는 게 아니고, 기존하고 좀 다르죠. 예, 그렇게 재는 게 좀 더 훨씬 더 정확한 데이터를 얻게 나온다. 밑에는 안 되고요. 10kHz 이상을 이야기하는 겁니다. 저 밑에 쪽은 그렇게 하면 안 되죠. 외도 공진이 들어가야 되기 때문에 그렇게 하면 안 되고, 그 밑에는 기존 걸 재고 그 위를 더 보고 싶다 그러면, 특히 20kHz 이상을 보고 싶다고 하면 저걸로 가지고 재는 게 훨씬 더 정확한 데이터를 얻는다. 그 이야기입니다.
Okay, so in sound check, as I mentioned, it really depends on the hardware, how high in frequency you can go. So if I just up the sampling rate, for example, and then from 44.1 to 96, I could go up to 192, but that's probably overkill for this headphone. And I save, assuming the headphones are still on, which it might not be, and we measure again. We'll see that we'll go above 20 kilohertz and out to 40 kilohertz. And again, we can see, so the blue curve is the 318 coupler with this half-inch mic that really is rolling off quite quickly above 20 kilohertz. And the red curve is the right flat plate 1/4-inch microphone.
지금 그 밑에 저기 색깔 이름이 뭡니까? 사이언인가? 뭔지는 모르겠습니다. 이 밑에 밑에 좀 파란 계열. 이 녀석이 이제 기존의 이어 시뮬레이터를 가지고 잰 거예요. 2분의 1인치. 네, 그러니까 특성이 완전 여기 쑥 꺼져고 좀 이상하죠? 그런데 이제 여기 빨간 게 이 녀석이 이제 4분의 1인치로 쟀고, 아까 말하는 것처럼 안쪽에 들어가 있는 게 아니고 바깥에 이제 플러싱 딱 돼가지고 있는, 그렇게 잰 겁니다.
And just to show you the phase, which is not great, we now have magnitude and phase, and you can see that it's definitely not super linear in that critical range of 1 to 5 kilohertz. So definitely something should be done there. All right. So just quickly, because I'm going way over time, I also just, out of curiosity, played back 30 kilohertz tone on the Stax headphones, and I couldn't hear it, no surprise. I played a 35 kilohertz tone, couldn't hear it, but when I played both, it became very audible, the intermodulation product of 5 kilohertz. That I could easily hear. So as good as those headphones are, they're about $5,000, they're not perfect. And granted, most music, as I said, will not be above 20 kilohertz, so it's unlikely that will happen. But if your electronics has some interference or it's picking up lights or alarms, you may actually now start to hear it. All right, and there's the Sonys, and there's the demo. So I'm going to go through some of this pretty quickly. I thought the high res was particularly interesting to people, so I kind of focused on that. But a lot of times when we measure distortion, it doesn't correlate well to human hearing. If we look at total harmonic distortion, in fact, we would say in general there's a very poor correlation to human hearing. So I wanted to look at different ways to measure distortion that correlate better to human hearing. And I always said, you know, the best test signal is music or speech, what you're actually listening to at real levels. So to my knowledge, the only way you can do that is by looking at the non-coherence between input and output. And non-coherence is actually quite simple. It's a byproduct of the transfer function. And basically, anything that is on the output that's not directly related to the input is non-coherent. And if we have a good enough signal-to-noise ratio, meaning it's not noise, then what's left over is essentially distortion. If you want more information, you can read AES paper that goes into a lot more of the technical details, but the function has actually been around for a long time. It's just not many people have applied it to acoustic measurements.
지금은 이제 좀 다른 주제로 해가지고 어떤 시그널로 잴 건가 하는 겁니다. 이제 그건 이제 주파수 특성 되는 게 아니고요. 아까 주파수 특성을 보자라는 거였고, 지금은 이제 이 이어폰 헤드폰이 왜곡이 있냐 없냐를 이제 보는 거죠. 사람들이 잘 느끼는 걸로 이제 어떤 신호를 넣어서 재는 게 이 스피커가 왜곡이 없이 좀 더 깨끗한 신호를 내는지 주파수 특성 말고요. 그게 돼서 이제 보는 건데, 이분이 이제 주장을 하는 것들은 non-coherent distortion 방식이에요. 투 채널 FFT하고 같다고 보시면 됩니다. 근데 이제 두 가지가 있습니다. 우리가 할 때 기본적으로 왜곡을 볼 때는 주로 본 게 이제 THD를 봤죠. 그래서 THD는 어떤 그 디바이스, 그러니까 이어폰 헤드폰이 제대로 설계가 됐는지 안 됐는지, 그리고 앞으로 생길 어떤 문제에 대한 원인을 보는 겁니다. 하지만 그게 그 THD가 많다고 해서 무조건 좋은 소리는 사람에게 들릴 때 왜곡이 많냐 졌냐 하는 것은 전혀 다른 얘기입니다. 물론 당연히 THD가 크면 왜곡이 크고 귀에 들릴 가능성은 많지만 그대로 똑같이 이렇게 가진 않는다는 거죠. 근데 여기서 이야기하는 것들은 NCD 같은 경우에는 원인 파악을 하는 게 나는 그건 잘 모르겠고, 사람이 들었을 때 좀 더 가깝게 실제 사람이 듣는 거하고 주관적인 거하고 좀 더 왜곡에 대한 가깝게 들릴 수 있는 방법입니다. 가장 큰 차이는 바로 측정하는 신호입니다. 바로 음악을 사용한다는, 우리가 직접 듣는. 그러면 THD 되는 거하고 NCD 되는 거 차이가 뭐냐? THD 같은 경우는 사인판 넣죠. 그거는 다이나믹스라는 게 전혀 없습니다. 그냥 비 하는 정적인 톤을 가지고 되는 겁니다. 우리 순간적으로 소리가 확 커지고 작아지고 할 때에 이게 이어폰, 헤드폰이 어떻게 반응한지에 대해서는 전혀 거기는 그런 정보가 없습니다. 근데 음악 시그널을 넣으면 다이나믹이라는 게 있죠. 소리가 크다 작았다 하면 범 이런 소리 들어갈 때, 그때 이게 다이나믹한 특성들이 어떻게 반영이 되는지는 NCD에서 다 보이게 되는 거죠. 이제 그렇게 해서 보는 것들이 가장 큰 차이고, 그게 실제 우리가 음악을 들을 때 왜곡을 잘 느낄 수 있는 거죠. 특히 이제 피아노 곡이 이렇게 땅 쳤을 때 뭐 찌글찌글 소리 나는 것들은 THD 보면 잘 안 보입니다. 하지만 NCD에서는 굉장히 선명하게 보입니다. 왜냐? 피아노 소리는 굉장히 다이나믹한 타악기 소리이기 때문에. 네. 거기에 대해서 이야기할 겁니다. 오케이?
Okay. So I wanted to use this method for doing some virtual playback of different headphones. And we teamed up with Sean Olive and his group from Harman to actually try to do subjective listening test of distortion and compare it to objective measurements. And the way we did this was we took a bunch of circumaural over-the-ear headphones, high-quality headphones, and we played back music over the headphones on a dummy head and recorded it. And then we took that recording and we equalized them all to have the same target response that Sean's going to talk about this afternoon. So in other words, different headphones, different distortion, but then equalized all to have the same linear response. And what my hope was is the only difference we would hear from headphone A to headphone B would be the nonlinearity, since they all had the same linearity. So this is the, he'll talk about this, but this is essentially the target response of what they think the preferred headphone should sound like. Do you need to, yeah, why don't you explain that real quickly?
Oh, no.
Okay, go. And we have a hard stop at 12:30 for lunch, or when? 12:30?
7 minutes.
Okay. I'll probably have, it's getting warm here anyway, so it'd be good to take a break. So what was really interesting was everyone who did the listening test agreed with these curves. So these curves are showing 4 different headphones. The green curve is actually the reference headphones, the stacks. And you can see that they have the lowest non-coherent distortion. And then the worst headphone was this orange curve. And all the subjective blindfolded or blind, double-blind listening tests, listening panel, said that this was audibly the worst headphone. We even have one other here, which is a bit funny. It had this spike around 1 kilohertz. And some people would, who did the listening said that this was the second worst. There was something a little funny about this headphone. So we got good correlation with subjective listening test. And we used real music that Sean and his group used for doing their subjective listening test. And it turned out that the program material did not seem to have a significant effect on the measured NCD because we made sure that they were all played back at the same level. So again, if you want more information, there's an AES paper from Listen and Harmon, and it goes into more details.
예, 이게 정전형 스탁스이고요. 제일 성능이 좋은 걸 알 수 있고요. 이게 문제가 있는 거고, 이 나머지들은 그냥 별로 우리가 어떤 왜곡을 좀 느끼기 어렵다라는 거고, 이건 확실하게 느낀다는 거죠. 그런데 THB의 다른 IMD나 이런 걸 재면 잘 안 보입니다. 예, 이 정기적인 거하고 약간 달라요. 정기적인 거 잴 때는 IMD 나빠지면 진이 나빠지는 걸로 가지만 이 이어폰 헤드폰 이 동네는 약간 좀 달라요. 예, 어쨌든 그렇게 돼가지고 있는데, 그래서 NCD가 확실히 좀 더 주관적인 거하고 콜레이션이 좀 높다고 하는 건 확실한데, 문제는 뭐냐고 하면 이게 음원을 뭘 쓰느냐에 또 다 다른 거 이게. 그러니까 상대적인 값을 알 수 있지만 절대적인 값을 알 수가 없는 거예요. 그래서 표준이 될 수가 없어요. 그래서 그냥 예를 들면 LG 삼성전자 이런 데서 어떤 문제가 생겼다. 그러면 그 문제가 있는지 없는지 보는 거는 쉬워요. 그래서 이거 대비해서 지금 얼마만큼 좋아진지 나빠진지에 대한 상대 비교하는 것들은 굉장히 편한데, 이 값이 어떤 측정된 값이 절대적인 의미는 있을 수가 없어요. 음악을 달리하면 또 달라져 버리기 때문에. 상대적인 비교용으로는 굉장히 훌륭한 기법이다. 그래서 표준화가 아직 되질 않았다라는 겁니다.
Okay, let me do a demonstration of that. So I'm going to switch to my non-coherent distortion sequence.
우리가 5분 천천히 시작해서 페어하게 5분마다 할게요. 전 점심시간이 55분. 네. 5분 줄여드렸는데 그거는 어쩔 수 없어요.
The sound check warns me that the sampling rate is 44.1 kilohertz on the music, so I got to change this back.
그렇게 하지 말고 시작도 5분 늦게 하고요. 제 타임도 5분 좀 5분씩 다 처음부터 시프트해가지고 뒤로 가는 걸로 하겠습니다.
All right, so you'll see the stimulus real quickly. and then I'll actually play it. So this is a recording of Bird on the Wire by Jennifer Warnes. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to play it through the headphones, but I'm also going to play it out of the artificial mouth here so you guys can hear it. So it's also runs for about 30, 40 seconds, so I didn't want you to fall asleep on me. So here we go. So this is being recorded by the ear simulators, and then I can compare the input to the output for linearity, or non-linearity. Now these measurements take longer because I'm using music as a test signal, and if I want a good signal to noise ratio, I got to do a lot of averaging, and I can't use music that is only low frequencies or high frequencies. But there you go. So you'll notice the frequency response, even though it's music, it's comparing the transfer function. It looks the same as before. And you also notice something that's kind of interesting is the non-coherent distortion here is of the left and right are a little different, and it's partly because the ear simulator on the right has a higher noise floor. But in any case, we're seeing distortion versus frequency. Here's the recorded waveform, which if I had more time, it would be interesting to actually play back over some reference headphones so you could hear exactly what the original headphone was doing. And this is the left and right tracking. So it's kind of a neat technique if you want to use real signals, music or speech, and analyze the headphones that way. But it won't tell you, for example, the type of distortion. It won't tell you whether it's symmetrical or asymmetrical non-linearities. For that, you need to still use typically harmonic distortion. All right. Is this a good stopping point then? Otherwise, I'm going to go over.
5 minutes.
5 minutes? Okay. Where am I here? Okay. So noise canceling headphones are become very popular with good reason. A lot of us fly, and we're used to very noisy long flights. The real trick to measuring noise canceling headphones is the setup. Basically, you want to play background noise outside of the headphones, and to really do it right, you need at least 2 speakers, if not more. And you can even get pretty fancy and use simulated background noise of like a recording of a noisy restaurant. And I've even used the background noise in a trade show floor as a way to measure the noise canceling because it's so high. But for this demonstration, I'm just going to use pink noise because that's kind of the standard way to do it, because it's going to be equal energy per nth octave. So noise canceling measurements really consist of, first, what we call unoccluded, which is going to be the baseline. Basically, it's a calibration because we want to know at what sound pressure level we're measuring the noise canceling headphones. So for that, I just remove the headphones.
노이즈 캔슬레이션 성능을 재려면 3번째입니다. 길을 뚫은 상태에서 하면 재고요. 헤드폰을 쓴 상태에서 재고 AC를 켠 상태에서 재고 이렇게 3번을 재서 그 차이를 보는 겁니다.
And then after we now have, quote, calibrated, typically we want to equalize the loudspeaker for a flat frequency response so that the noise is played back at equal amplitude at all frequencies.
주의할 것은 스피커가 반드시 캘리브레이션 돼 있어야 됩니다. 모든 주파수를 특성을 플랫하게 내줘야 성능을 제대로 보겠죠.
And then we're going to put the headphones on in passive mode. So the noise canceling circuit off, but just because the headphones are going to cover the microphones, we'll get some high frequency passive cancellation. Then we'll turn the active noise canceling circuit on, and we'll measure the active cancellation typically more at low frequencies as well as the passive. And then since noise cancellation is a relative measurement, we actually want to see the difference. So passive isolation will be the difference between number 2 and number 1. And the active, of course, now will be between number 3 and number 2. And then last, we can calculate the total noise cancellation. So I have a sequence that does this. For today, I'm just going to use the right headphone and only measure with noise blasting at the right headphone.
N실이 될 때는 L을 다 재는 게 아니고 한쪽 채널만 재게 돼 있습니다. L인지 R인지 하나 선택을 해가지고요.
Okay, so I have some messages here. So please remove headphones and measure unoccluded. Again, this is the reference. I've already equalized it, so it should be pretty flat. All right. Now I put my headphones on, turned off. So just
ANC를 끈 상태에서 감쇄율만.
Be a good idea to do the seal check, but flap the coupler is pretty easy.
실링이 잘 돼야 됩니다.
So at the high frequencies, we see the attenuation, but not at the low frequencies.
고주파수가 많이 차단되면 알 수 있죠.
Now it's important to use a real-time analyzer here, especially if we're trying to use real background noise because it's going to be fluctuating. So you notice that I'm using a third octave real-time analyzer.
재밌는 거는 이게 저주파수 쪽은 오히려 더 커지죠. 이게 이제 씌우고 나면 안에 룸 모드가 생겨서 더 커지는 부분도 있습니다.
So now I'm going to turn on the noise canceling circuit.
이제 ANC를 켜고요.
So now we see the low frequencies attenuated and the high frequencies attenuated. But at 1 kilohertz, it's not very good in this particular headphone.
1kHz 빼고 위아래 다 죽죠.
And then we calculate the total attenuation is on average 25 dB.
25dB 이상 전체적으로 차단됐다는 걸 알 수 있습니다.
We also notice that some artifacts of when you put the headphones on, the couplers create a bit of a resonance at low frequency. So we get a little bit of a boost. And the active noise canceling circuit also can't keep up at the higher frequencies. So in here it's doing a nice job attenuating, and then up here it actually can't keep up. The feedback is now boosting the noise a little. So it's not perfect, but some of the better headphones now you'll see even around 30 dB of attenuation.
지금 오히려 이게 ANC를 켜니까 여기 더 커져 버렸죠. 이게 뭐 쓰레기인가요? 이렇게 생각하시면 안 되고, 이게 ANC라는 것들은 저주파만 먹지 고주파수는 오히려 더 커질 수도 있다라는 거예요. 페이즈가 안 맞아가지고요. 그래서 이게 좀 더 커짐을 알 수 있어요.
So I'm going to talk about some practical Bluetooth and what we call open loop headphone measurements. So let's get right into it. So we're all used to measuring loudspeakers typically, where you can play a signal in the device, for example, through an amplifier into the speaker, and directly coming back out and measure the acoustic signal. But nowadays, we have a lot of devices such as phones and smart speakers, which have no electrical input. So the stimulus has to come from another source. It may have to come from Bluetooth, it may have to come from a memory stick, or even the cloud for like a smart speaker. So we call that open loop versus closed loop. And nowadays, just about all devices are typically require what we call open loop measurements. So just a quick summary of the difference. So instead of having your typical input and outputs that are in the same domain, for example, analog, we may actually have mixed domain where we have digital and analog. And the other difference is that typically the sampling rates are from different devices. So we have an issue with potentially different sampling rates as well as delay, because now we don't know when the signal is going to get played exactly. So we need what we call some way to compensate for the latency between input and output. You stop me if you want to. Okay. So I'll skip through this because we're kind of short on time, but basically we typically have to create a test signal in the digital domain, and we need to calibrate in terms of FS. There's an AES specification that we can use to deal with the different sampling rates, because there's no master clock. There's a different codec on the, for example, the audio interface than there is on the phone or the smart speaker. What we do is what we call post-processing, where we can not only change the sampling rate, but we can also do a frequency shift to make sure that both clocks line up. And I'm going to demonstrate that in a moment. And then in sound check, we have something called auto delay. And auto delay is a smart cross correlation where it compares the input and output signal. And if there's any latency, like in Bluetooth, it could be 200 milliseconds, it will automatically subtract that out.
오픈루프 테스트 할 때는 세 가지의 명심을 하셔야 되는데요. 일단 첫 번째는 샘플링 레이시 반드시 맞아야 되는 거고요. 시그널 제너레이션 하는 게 주고 내가 이렇게 받아들일 때 그게 중요하고, 두 번째는 똑같은 내가 44100이라고 한다고 해도 그게 또 프리퀀시가 맞지 않을 수 있습니다. 미세하게 내가 1kg로 내준다 그러면 사실 1kg가 아니고 1.0 몇 킬로, 뭐 0.998kg 이렇게 나올 수도 있거든요. 그것도 맞춰줘야 됩니다. 또 세 번째 맞춰줘야 될 거는 바로 이제 딜레이를 맞춰줘야 됩니다. 그래서 그러니까 뭐 페이즈 디퍼런스 같은 이 세 가지를 다 같이 보상을 해주고 측정하지 않으면 나중에 측정할 때 굉장히 큰 에러를 발생시킬 수 있습니다. 그래서 사운드 체크에서는 이 세 가지를 갖다가 자동으로 이제 기본적으로 측정을 할 때 자동으로 보정을 해주는 작업들을 항상 하게 되어 있습니다.
Okay. So instead of the stimulus and response being connected together directly, SoundCheck doesn't care. It literally says, okay, I can have a stimulus signal and I can save it as a WAV file and then put it on my device under test. And then if I call back in the recording, I can then just, if I know what the original stimulus was, I can still calculate frequency response, THD, and rub and buzz. It does not care when the data is collected.
아까 그 세 가지 조건이 정확하게 만족이 되지 않을 때 밑에 있는 이런 데이터들은 다 이상한 값으로 나올 수밖에 없습니다. 그래서 굉장히 조심하셔서 측정을 하셔야 됩니다.
So I'm going to give you some examples here. I'm actually going to do playback and record. Part of the trick here is that sometimes we need a trigger signal when we're doing a playback only. In a little bit, I'm going to measure both the Bluetooth headset and these Lightning headphones, and I will load the test signal onto my phone and do a trigger that you'll hear in order to tell SoundCheck to start recording the stimulus.
반드시 트리거 톤을 사용을 해서요. 이제 그 기기가 어떤 내가 알고 있는 트리거 톤이 나오면 얼마 뒤에 이제 시그널에 나오겠건 해서 이렇게 레코딩을 딱 열어주고 그걸 받아들여서 분석을 하도록 되어 있습니다. 그래서 왜냐 그러면 입출력이 서로 다르기 때문에 내가 어떤 서로 알고 있는 시그널을 반드시 사용해야 됩니다. 그걸 갖다가 트리거 톤이라고 이야기합니다.
Okay, and it's pretty much the same thing for record only. So let's say I want to measure the microphone on my smartphone or smart speaker for that matter. So there, I'm going to play the stimulus over some calibrated, like artificial mouth, and then I'm going to capture a WAV file on my phone and bring it into SoundCheck as just as if it had measured it. But in fact, it will have taken the WAV file off the phone, the recording, and then do the analysis as a post-processing.
이거 같은 경우는 이제 마이크로폰의 특성을 측정을 할 건데요. 휴대폰에 있는 마이크로폰 특성할 거야. 같은 경우에는 시그널을 내줘서 스마트폰에 있는 레코딩 기능을 이용을 해서 레코딩을 하고 그걸 파일을 다시 사운드체크에 다운로드 받은 다음에 거기서 분석을 하게 되어 있습니다. 물론 이것도 트리거톤이 반드시 들어가 있어야 됩니다.
So, as I mentioned, we may need to resample the signal. For example, today when I do my Bluetooth measurements, the Bluetooth A2DP is going to be set to 48 kilohertz sampling rate, but my audio recording hardware is actually at 44.1. So I'll want to upsample or downsample. Normally I downsample because of better quality, so that I can truly compare the stimulus to the recorded signal.
입출력이 동일 기기가 아닐 때 같은 경우에는 반드시 리샘플링하고 주파수 시프트가 반드시 필요하게 되어 있습니다. 그 방법은 리샘플링을 먼저 해준 다음에 그 다음에 프리퀀시 시프트를 하게 되어 있습니다.
And if I don't have exactly the same clock frequency because I have two different digital devices, I actually have to do a frequency shift in order to measure phase accurately. Because if one is at 44.105 kilohertz and the other one's at 44.100 kilohertz, at the high frequencies we'll start to see the phase change just due to the slight difference in sampling rate.
44100하고 44100O 이렇게 두 개가 차이가 날 수, 프리퀀시가 만약에 차이가 난다고 하면 나중에 주파수 응답에서 이렇게 좀 특이한 현상들이 보이게 되어 있습니다. 그리고 이런 것들을 다 맞춰주고 해야 됩니다.
Okay, I'm going to skip over this. This is some of the same things I said. So all these measurements can be done in SoundCheck. And as I mentioned, many devices nowadays, whether it's smartphones, smart speakers, Bluetooth audio, network audio, which could be a smart speaker, even cars now, there's typically no way to get a signal in other than streaming or Bluetooth.
지금은 대부분의 기기들이 뭐 AI 스피커부터 해가지고 다 지금은 오픈루프 테스트가 대세가 되어 있습니다. 내가 입력 주고 바꾸하는 이런 것들이 잘 안 되기 때문에 스트리밍 서비스하는 같은 경우는 더 그렇겠죠.
So my first demonstration is going to be on a Bluetooth headset, the same headphones I was measuring before. And I'm going to play the stimulus through the Bluetooth interface. Right here. The BTC 4148, and then I'm going to be, of course, just like you saw earlier, I'm going to be measuring both the earphones, but I'm also going to be measuring the microphone in the Bluetooth headset by playing a signal through an artificial mouth. Now, a lot of these headphones are also used for phone calls, so we may want to test to a particular telecom standard like TIA 920. I don't have time to demonstrate that to you, but we also have sequences for doing standardized telecom measurements, for example, on headsets. Okay. So, that's, I think some of this I'm just going to skip through real quickly, but basically when we do Bluetooth measurements, we have different codecs. Typically for playback, again for musical playback, we use A2DP or aptX, and in the future we're working on LDAC and aptX HD. If we're using the headset as essentially as a phone or a communication device, we have to use HFP and HSP for hands-free and headset protocol, which is a much lower bit rate and sampling rate, and is actually just mono. So we have our calibrated Bluetooth interface now will switch codecs. And a lot of people ask us whether we support Bluetooth 5.0. Well, the answer is yes, because the audio part of Bluetooth 5.0 has not changed at all since Bluetooth 2.0. So a lot of other things have changed in the Bluetooth protocol, but not the audio. Do you want to?
예, 블루투스 2.0부터 지금 5.0까지 음향 같은 부분에서는 차이가 거의 없기 때문에 예, 음향 성능에서는 차이가 없다. 다른 부분에서 많이 개선이 되었다.
Try to cool you guys down. Okay. So just real quickly, the trickiest part about really, or I should say the slowest thing about measuring Bluetooth devices is pairing the device. And if we want to, we can do the old traditional inquiry where the Bluetooth interface goes out for a period of time and it looks for all the Bluetooth devices out in the wild RF frequency world. And that can take a long time. It can actually take 30 seconds depending on how many devices are out there. So there's a much better way to do this, which is to, if we know the MAC address, if we know the name of the device or the address, we can much quickly just enter that into our Bluetooth interface and pair very quickly. So today I'm going to use, I got a MAC address on a barcode on top of my headphones, and I'm just going to use my barcode scanner to input the MAC address into the software to pair automatically. So let me demonstrate. So the first thing I'm going to do start my sequence, and you can see the sequence is actually extremely elaborate because it's doing a lot of things. In fact, I'll leave it open. So it's actually got two different stimulus sweeps, one for A2DP, other one's for handset protocol. So you can see 20 to 20 kilohertz for playback and 100 hertz to 8 kilohertz for measuring the microphone, as well as the earphones and narrowband. And then you'll see the pairing of the device. It sets the codec, it does a measurement, it does a resampling from 48 kilohertz down to 44.1. It does a frequency shift to make sure that the different clocks are matched up. And then it does some basic displays, and then it switches protocols and does a hands-free. So you can just watch it go through this as I run the demonstration, and you'll see different displays up here of the different measurements. So I'll hit start. So now I need to put my Bluetooth headphones, or headset really, into pairing mode. So I need to get the familiar flashing blue and red light. There we go. Now I hit enter. And I could wait and do an inquiry or just enter the address automatically. So there it is. If I double click, it just automatically continues. And now you can hear the sweep through the headphones. So it's put it into A2DP. And after it does the measurement, it's going to resample to 44.1 kilohertz from 48. It does the frequency shift, and there we get the fundamental and THD in A2DP for both the left and right ear. There's the measurement of the hands-free protocol compared to A2DP. And last but not least, we have the send response in HFP. So this would normally take a lot of time to measure. And with SoundCheck, because we can automate the sequence editor, you can see something that is fairly sophisticated can be done in under a minute, probably in 30 seconds. You want to explain that? Okay.
아까 말씀드린 기능들이 다 들어가 있고요. 이게 사운드체크가 이게 좀 훌륭한 장비인 게 저렇게 이렇게 순차적으로 이렇게 그 에디팅을 해서 넣을 수 있는 것들이 다른 제품에 비해서 굉장히 탁월합니다. 그래서 뭔가 자동적으로 이렇게 또 뭔가 에러가 생길 때는 에러 메시지를 띄워주고, 그 다음에 거기다가 내가 무슨 값을 넣으면 그 다음으로 가고 그 다음으로 가고 그 다음으로 가면서 이렇게 비춰져 있는 것들이, 제가 여러 장비를 써봤지만 이런 부분에서는 굉장히 탁월하게 괜찮은 걸로 되어 있습니다.
Okay. It might be interesting to compare the analog measurements to the Bluetooth measurements as well, especially for things like distortion. Okay, I'm going to skip over this and go right to measuring the Lightning headphones. So sorry I don't have time, but so Lightning headphones is again particularly tricky because I got to get the test signal onto my iPhone in this case. So I've already preloaded it through iTunes. So you can hear the sweep. You also hear a trigger tone, which you'll see in a moment.
라이트닝 이어폰 헤드폰을 측정할 때는 반드시 아이튠즈에다가 저 테스트 시그널 다운로드를 여기서 만든 걸, 사운드체크에서 만든 걸 거기다가 아이튠즈에 업로드를 해서 스마트폰에 다운로드를 해서 이렇게 테스트를 해야 됩니다.
So for this demo, I'm going to use KeyMar because of the earbuds. And hopefully I get a good seal. Now this might be one where you'd want to do some 5 averages or something like that.
맨 처음에 1kHz 삑 하는 게 1kHz 트리거 톤입니다. 이제 거기서 1kHz 트리거 톤이 삑 나올 때 그걸 가지고 이제 프리퀀시 시프트를 할 건지 안 할 건지 얼마인지 다 알 수 있겠죠. 또 샘플링이 맞는지 안 맞는지 이런 모든 게 그 트리거 톤의 정보를 가지고 리샘플링을 얼마큼 해야 될지, 프리퀀시 시프트가 얼마 정도 필요한 건지를 알고, 그다음에 그 뒤에 나오는 시그널, 이제 나중에 이제 그거는 버리고 그 뒤에 있는 이제 1초 뒤에 나오는 시그널에서 녹음된 그 파일을 가지고 분석에 들어간다고 보시면 됩니다.
For this measurement, I'm going to use, instead of a step sign, a continuous sign sweep in order to calculate the impulse response as well. So just kind of give you an example where we don't have to just use step sign. We can use music, which you saw for the non-coherent distortion. We can also measure impulse response, but for that we need a continuous sign sweep, or we could also use transfer function. So I hit start. And now it's going to say, hey, get ready to push play. Well, of course, my phone turned off and needs my face. This is annoying. Let's hope I caught it. Yes, very good. It's quick enough. So here you can see the trigger tone played out of the headphones, which SoundCheck will just ignore as far as the frequency response, but it will use it to detect the sampling rate and apply the frequency shift.
맨 처음에 나온 게 트리거 톤이고요. 저거는 나중에 분석할 때는 이제 자동으로 없애줍니다. 그리고 저기서부터 아까 그 샘플링 정보라든지 프리퀀시 시프트를 해야 될지 얼마나 해야 될지에 대한 정보들 저기서 다 뽑아가지고 이제 다 처리해서 나와야 정확한 분석이 가능하다라는 겁니다.
So I just hit continue, and then we should see the familiar frequency response. Okay, I didn't do as good a seal in the right ear. I got my distortion, and now I also have my impulse response. So that's kind of nice because that can be also very useful for certain type of applications. All right, and then last but not least, I'm going to skip over some of these things about setting the trigger. And I think really I just want to come to the end here because of the time we've run out. And just summarize by saying, there's a lot of things we can measure. We just need to know the inputs and the outputs and how to deal with them. SoundCheck does not care where the stimulus and the response come from, as long as we can capture them and put them into SoundCheck. We could do closed loop testing. We can do open loop testing. And We can even measure things like smart devices. So we will be coming back most likely in the fall. We've just started a seminar series on measuring smart devices. We actually have pretty much one of all these devices, and we show how we can use a wake word to play a test signal and measure it. And we call it the Speakers Got Smarter, Did Your Test System series. So I'd like to just end with that, and thank you for your time.